What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today, as you can tell by the title, we are back with another updated hero guide, this time focusing on Kylo Ren. A few months back I did do a poll to see if you guys wanted to see all of the hero guides get updated, which, as you can see by the results, was a pretty resounding yes, and Kylo was one of the characters that I wanted to update as fast as I could because my last guide for him was actually released 3 days before it was announced that he was getting a huge buff, and so that guide is actually completely redundant at this point, hence why I wanted to focus on him so much. Now, you can see on screen what we're going to be going through in this video. We will of course start off with his base stats, then go through and break down all of his abilities, and then I will touch on both some tips for Galactic Assault and the hero game modes, covering both the star cards as well as just some general gameplay tips as well. So if that is what you guys are looking for in a hero guide, then make sure to drop a like on the video and let's see if we can't get through 500 likes. Now, keep in mind that almost everything in this guide was just tested in arcade, and while I'm 99% sure that all of these stats do transfer over to multiplayer, just bear in mind that there is always a chance that some stats may actually change from arcade to multiplayer, so if you do see any stats that don't seem right, then that's most likely what's happened. So getting stuck into it, first off we're going to take a look at his base HP, and he does have the average health pool for a Saber user coming in at the stock standard 750 HP. On top of that, he does also have 250 health regen as well, which again is pretty much the average for the Saber users, so you can go from 750 all the way down to 500 and still be able to regen all the way back to full health. Now, his weapon of choice is of course his custom lightsaber with the crossguard, and this has been given an enormous buff since the last guide went up. It deals 125 damage per hit from the front and 165 damage per hit from behind, which is about the average for a Saber user, with the front damage being slightly less than average, but the damage from behind is actually slightly above average, surprisingly. These stats used to be 100 over 120, so 125 over 165 is obviously a pretty enormous buff, and you can see why I wanted to update this guide so quickly. Now, he has a swing speed of 1.8 swings per second, which is just slightly below average due to the higher damage output from behind, but this is actually slightly faster than his old swing speed, which was 1.6 swings per second. So not too much of a difference, but a difference nonetheless. His lunge distance is what I'd probably class as medium. Some lunges actually seem to go pretty far, especially when it's the first swing, but other times his lunge is actually completely the opposite, so it is a little inconsistent in terms of how far he lunges when he swings the saber. As for his stamina pool, I have classed it as medium, but it is probably slightly better than average, so it'd be somewhere between medium and high, but compared to the likes of Obi-Wan, I couldn't rate it as high, so I have just gone with medium. Now, moving on to his abilities, and he does have a pretty beastly set of abilities, arguably some of the best in the game, and in my opinion definitely the most deadly combination of abilities out of every single character. His L1 ability is called Pull, which has a 20-second cooldown, and exactly as it sounds, this one just allows Kylo to pull anyone within the area of effect towards his general direction. Now, obviously in the footage you're seeing on screen, it is sort of showing the enemies dying instantly. That's just an arcade thing, so it's actually not going to deal that damage in the multiplayer setting. It does actually deal damage, however it's only 10 damage, so it is barely worth noting, but the damage is not its main focus, as it's mostly used to just get enemies out of position and closer for you to attack. This ability is great for crowd control against groups of enemies. Getting them all off their feet and leaving them open to attack and unable to shoot for a few seconds is definitely something that comes in handy more often than not. Its only downsides are that it can be blocked or evaded with a roll, and it does have a slow animation. However, if you use it while you're jumping, that actually allows you to keep moving while you use it and essentially avoid the animation. So you're best to pretty much always jump and then use it 99% of the time. Moving on to his L1R1 ability, this one is called Frenzy, and it has a very fast 10-second cooldown. This ability is essentially like an aimbot for Kylo's saber. When someone is within its range, if you use the ability, it just locks on and does all the work for you, swinging 3 times so long as there are enemies in range. It deals 125 damage per hit, and it does actually give Kylo 40% damage reduction as well, so overall it is a really solid ability. Frenzy is insane at taking out 2 or 3 enemies in the blink of an eye, just one click of a button, and it will pretty much wipe out any regular troopers within range of those 3 swings, or even take out a reinforcement from full health if you can land all 3 hits. Its only real downside is that it can sometimes bug out a little bit, only swinging once and then sort of cancelling, or sometimes just randomly flinging you up in the air, but most of the time it does work as intended. Moving on now to the R1 ability, this one is his freeze ability, and it has a pretty long 25-second cooldown, which is warranted with how powerful this one is. As the name suggests, this one allows Kylo to freeze anyone within the area of effect, freezing them for roughly 3 seconds. However, once you do hit them with a saber, they will be broken free. The thing is though that blaster damage doesn't actually break them out of the freeze, and so if you do just freeze them and leave them be, teammates can still deal a heap of damage while they're frozen, which is a little bit of a dirty tactic if I'm honest. I try not to promote stuff like that, but this is a guide and I would be lying if I said it wasn't a strong tactic to use. As for its weaknesses, again it can be blocked by sabers or evaded by combat rolls, so it's not unstoppable by any means, but it is a very strong ability nonetheless. So that is it for all of his base stats and abilities. Now we're going to move on to some of the more important stuff, starting with his best star cards for Galactic Assault. Obviously, it does really come down to personal preference, so these definitely aren't the only cards that you can use, but these are just the cards that I think are the most important and most well-suited cards for Galactic Assault. So the first card I'm going to recommend is his Closing In star card, and this one essentially just increases the range in which you can lock onto enemies with his Frenzy ability, which kind of goes without saying just how useful that is. Fully maxed, it does increase the range by a massive 40%, and so this is easily one of his best cards in my opinion with how useful Frenzy can be. The next card I'd recommend using is his Bloodlust card, which increases the damage of his Frenzy attack by 20 with each hit when fully maxed. Again, this one kind of speaks for itself. It's not actually that useful against troopers, but against a hero or reinforcements it deals an extra 60 damage, so I do tend to run this one most of the time. Now for the third card, this is one that a lot of people might not tend to use, but I like to run the Harsh Pull card for this slot, which adds an extra 50 damage to his Force Pull. That does only still result in 60 damage all up, which is not even half the damage you need to kill a trooper, so you might be wondering why this card is useful, but it does actually leave those enemies open for a one hit kill, since that 60 damage from the pull combined with one swing is 185 damage. So this card pretty much allows a one hit kill against any regular troopers other than the heavy that you have hit with that Force Pull. Now the last card I'm going to mention is probably to replace that last card if you don't feel like you want to use that one, and this one is the Power Reach star card. This one essentially just increases the area of effect of the pull ability by up to 30%, so it does allow you to grab those enemies from further away and drop them at your feet, which is always very handy. Now, like I said, these are the main cards that I'd personally recommend using. However, if you do disagree, then definitely feel free to let us all know down in the comment section, as there really is no right or wrong when it comes to something like choosing star cards. So now moving on to some of the best maps to choose Kylo on when you're playing Galactic Assault, and the top 3 that I've picked are Jakku, Yavin 4 and Kashyyyk. Jakku might seem like a bit of a weird one, but with his combination of abilities it really does suit the map, allowing you to pull enemies out of position on that second and third phase where it can be really hard to infiltrate those areas, as we all know. The thing with these maps too is that they are on offense for the dark side, and at least for me anyway, I tend to do much better on offense when it comes to playing as heroes. Now obviously this doesn't mean that these are the only 3 maps you should choose him on. He's honestly great on, I would say, literally every single map in the game, but these ones are probably just a good starting place if you're not too sure what to choose him on. Now as for some tips for Galactic Assault, and like I touched on a little bit earlier, Kylo's ability set is undoubtedly one of the best combinations in the game, and in my opinion it is pretty much what makes him as strong as he is. It's not to say that you need to rely only on his abilities, that's not true by any means, but trying to make the most of those deadly abilities can be the difference between like a 30 kill streak and a 50 kill streak, and using those abilities on objectives and helping to defend or attack can also be the difference between winning and losing. Obviously, most characters have their own sort of playstyle. Some characters like Yoda or Phasma can be seen as a little bit more team or objective based characters, but for Kylo, his best playstyle in my opinion is just that Slayer role where your main focus is just to try and take out as many enemies as you can, which in turn will then help the rest of your team play the objective. All of his abilities are pretty much focused on killing enemies, and combining either the freeze or the pull ability with his frenzy, he can very quickly wipe out pretty much whole squads without any effort at all, which as I just mentioned means that the squad you just killed can't push in an attack or defend that objective, leaving the job much easier for the rest of your team. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't still PTFO with Kylo. He does still do really well in and around the objective, and if the situation calls on that, then you should definitely always play the objective, but due to his playstyle, he does definitely have a little bit more freedom to head out once your team arrives on that objective, and just try and cut the flow of enemies. Situating yourself on the map is also a big thing with Kylo. He's definitely the type of character that you want to try and be a little bit more thoughtful with rather than just tanking like Vader or going crazy like Maul. And the best way that I've found to get in that right spot with Kylo is just to continuously flank the enemies rather than trying to always take them head on. Now, that's not to say that you can't take them head on. He's definitely strong enough to play that way if you are confident enough to do so, but if you're not quite as experienced or confident as some of the other players out there, then it can always be a great idea to try and get behind the enemy team, at which point you'll often find groups clumped together and then leaving them open to a very quick frenzy attack. Obviously, you can say that about any character, flanking is pretty much always a good idea, but with Kylo having the ability combo that he does, it just seems to work so well when you get behind 3 or 4 enemies and can just take them all out at the click of a button, rather than having to take them out individually like you do with other characters and risking them noticing you and dealing some quick damage. Kylo can definitely be a little bit tricky to get the hang of. I used to be absolutely terrible with him, and to be honest, he's still not my best character, but like I said earlier, just combine your abilities, focus on map situation, and try to play fairly aggressive, and it will definitely go a long way towards improving your Kylo gameplay overall. So that is going to be it for the Galactic Assault tips. Now we're going to move on to some tips for the hero vs villain game mode. So starting off with the best star cards, and honestly a lot of these are pretty similar to his GA cards, as he kind of only has 4 or 5 cards that are really solid, but there are still some small changes. The first card I'm going to recommend is the Resilience card, and what this one does is it pretty much just grants Kylo extra damage and damage reduction every time he's around another villain. Now in GA, obviously this isn't really worth it, but in HVV and Hero Showdown, let's be honest, you're almost always close to a teammate, and so an extra 20 damage and 10% damage reduction is definitely a handy little bonus. The second card is again the Bloodlust card that I mentioned earlier for GA, and this just speaks for itself really. Dealing more damage with Frenzy is obviously pretty helpful, so this is another solid card to use. As for the third card, again this one is the Closing In card that allows Frenzy to be used from a further distance, and again this one is pretty self-explanatory, however it's definitely not as useful in these modes as it is in GA. Now if you don't want to use any of those cards, then the Power Reach card that I mentioned earlier is pretty handy as well, allowing you to just pull enemy blaster heroes from further away, which in turn helps you close the distance much easier and put the battle on your terms. Now moving on to some tips for the hero game modes, and if I'm going to be honest, most of it can be transferred straight from the GA tips, so I won't cover too much, but I will just touch on what I mentioned. Kylo is obviously super powerful in GA even when he's on his own, but at times he can struggle against certain characters in these modes, and so my first tip, which kind of relates to everyone honestly, but very much so for Kylo, is that you should do your best to stick with teammates as much as possible. Now it's not to say that Kylo sucks in these modes, that is far from the truth, but he definitely is at his most useful when you've got teammates around you, as the freeze and pull abilities are definitely more powerful when you have multiple teammates to attack them right after. Just like in GA as well, trying to get behind enemies when they're distracted is also super helpful because of that increased damage from behind. That kind of goes without saying, but since Kylo has such a big difference between his damage from the front and behind, this is a much more efficient way to take out enemies. Now, as for some characters to look out for, Chewie, Luke and Anakin are the 3 main characters that can cause you some trouble in my opinion. Chewie is far from the beast that he used to be back in the day, but his bowcaster can still be a nuisance if you don't play your cards right, so he's definitely just someone to keep your eye on. You should do pretty well against him most of the time, but just know that if he does use that furious bowcaster and you're close enough to him, he can take you out very quickly. As for Luke, his swing speed is just pretty ridiculous honestly, and it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Again, not to say that he's impossible to beat or anything like that, just try and avoid letting him get some quick attacks in, as his swing speed buff from a while ago is pretty deadly. As for Anakin, he's not too bad either, but we all know that Anakin players love to just spam those abilities, which can result in a death more often than not. One-on-one, he's not too bad to face, but if he does catch you off guard and spam those abilities, it does not bode well for you at all. But anyway, that is going to be it for our Kylo Ren hero guide, guys. Hopefully some of these tips did help you guys out, and if they did, then make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any more Battlefront 2 or Fallen Order videos. Feel free to comment down below which character you would like to see next, and I will do my best to get onto that as fast as possible. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.